Monday to Friday on GB News.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Hello there, welcome to Dewbs & Co with me, Michelle Dewberry, the show where we'll get into some of the things that have got you talking today, but not Harry and Meghan, OK? Not Harry and Meghan, that's not for me. I'm trying. I only managed about 1 and a bit episodes. I took it for the team, but that's all I could bear. So if you want H&M, this is not the show for you. But if you want to get into what I would call the more important things going on in this country, then this is the show for you. Strikes. The Health Secretary is currently meeting nursing unions as we speak, assuming that they're going to plan with their timings. How involved do you think the government should be when it comes to all of these kind of union negotiations? More hands-on or not? And with them, we know by now, don't we, record high waiting lists in the NHS, record high A&E waiting lists and all the rest of it. I'm asking you, what do you think the answer is? I think I've come up with something. If Steve Barclay's watching, he can have my suggestion for free, but I'll tell you what it is. You can judge whether or not you think it's a good one. And post-Brexit Britain, who do you think we should do trade deals with? James Cleverly's been speaking, saying that he's going to focus on some middle-level countries. Some people are saying basically that means it's a race to the bottom and we couldn't care less the human rights records of certain countries. Is that true, or is it just common sense to trade with everybody? And Christmas party, when is a Christmas party not a Christmas party, should I say? Well, when apparently someone is offended by the concept of Christmas. Some civil servants have been told to call their Christmas parties festivities to avoid drinking alcohol if there's people there that are sober. Come off it. If you're offended by Christmas, don't go to a Christmas party. Am I wrong? You tell me. I'll have all of that to come, but first up, let's bring ourselves up to speed with tonight's latest headlines.
Michelle, thank you. And we begin this bulletin with some breaking news just coming to us within the last 15 minutes or so. Police have named 7 people believed to have been killed following an explosion at a block of flats in Jersey over the weekend. They are Peter Bowler, Raymond Brown, Romo and Louise de Almeida, Derek and Sylvia Ellis and Billy Marsden. 5 people are known to have died following the blast in St Helier. More detail on that as it reaches us. Well, in other news today, rail strikes will continue into the Christmas period after members of the RMT union rejected the latest pay offer on the table. 63% of the union's members turned down a deal offered by Network Rail of a 5% pay rise this year and then a 4% pay rise in 2023. Now, 2 48-hour strikes will go ahead and passengers are being warned to expect delays and cancellations tomorrow and Wednesday, as well as on Friday and Saturday. Government ministers have been holding an emergency meeting in a bid to minimise disruption. The Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster, Oliver Dowden, says all strikes should be called off.
The single best thing that could be done to minimise those risks, we can't eliminate them altogether, is for the strikes to be called off and for those unions to once again engage with the employers. Because I think it's only fair and reasonable that at a time when people are struggling both with the consequence of the situation in Russia, Ukraine, as we emerge from COVID and indeed this winter weather, I don't think most people think it's fair and reasonable to undertake these strikes. So my message to them would be, even now, please call them off.
Meanwhile, ambulance staff and a number of NHS workers in Scotland have called off their strike action following a pay deal with the Scottish Government. 2 unions, Unite and Unison, say an average of 62% of their members backed the pay offer on the table. For the lowest paid, it would mean an 11.3% pay rise with an average rise of 7.5% for all. Well, the other main story on GB News today, 3 young boys have died after falling through an icy lake in Solihull yesterday. Police say the children aged between 8 and 11 were in cardiac arrest when they were pulled from the icy water in Kingshurst. A fourth boy, aged 6, remains in a critical condition in hospital. One police officer was released from hospital following treatment for hypothermia after he tried to punch through the ice to reach the boys. Chief Superintendent Richard Harris says a search of the lake has continued to establish if anyone else fell into the water.
We have to be 100% certain that there is no one else possibly in the water at this time. It's important to stress, though, that we've had no contact from anybody suggesting that there's anybody else missing. But until we're 100% certain, we will be carrying on searches throughout the course of today.
A lab technician has been found guilty of murdering his work colleague at his parents' home in Leicestershire last year. Ross McCullum pleaded guilty to the manslaughter of 23-year-old Megan Newborough, but claimed he couldn't be guilty of murder because he acted after a loss of control triggered by his victim. He said he went into a blind rage set off by undiagnosed PTSD caused by unreported childhood sexual abuse. The court heard how he tried to cover up her murder by hiding her clothes in bins and professing his love for her in a voicemail 3 hours after he'd killed her. Now, the Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, has warned there's a tough road ahead, despite the fact that Britain's economy grew between September and October. Figures from the Office for National Statistics show a 0.5% increase in GDP during October. However, the economy has shrunk overall, looking at the last 3 months. The Shadow Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, says the numbers underline the government's failure to grow the economy. Jeremy Hunt says the government does have a workable plan.
These figures confirm that this is a very challenging economic situation here and across the world, and it will get worse before it gets better. But we have a plan that will more than halve inflation over the next year, and if we stay the course, we can get back to the strong economic growth that we need.
Entertainment news, and the second trailer of the Duke and Duchess of Sussex's Netflix docuseries has been released, with Prince Harry accusing some of lying to protect his brother. It's not clear who he's referring to. He was also seen musing what might have happened if he hadn't left the royal family. The trailer for the latest 3 episodes, which will be released on Thursday, has been unveiled after the first set was released last week.
I wasn't being thrown to the wolves, I was being fed to the wolves.
They were actively recruiting people to disseminate disinformation.
They were happy to lie to protect my brother. They were never willing to tell the truth to protect us.
You are up to date on TV, online and DAB+ radio. You're with GB News. Now more from Michelle and Dewbs & Co.
Thanks for that, Polly. What awful news, isn't it, about those little boys on the lake? I'm praying, so I am, that little 6-year-old as well manages to pull through. Can you imagine what those families must be going through? It's awful, isn't it? I'm with you right through until 7 o'clock this evening. Alongside me, my panel, I've got Henry Hill, the Deputy Editor of Conservative Home, and Peter Edwards, the former editor of Labourist. Good evening, gentlemen. Nicolaus is saying, Michelle, you're brightening lives today with your dress. Bright pink, in case you're listening, not watching. You two, on the other hand, you didn't get the bright clothes memo, did you?
Monochrome.
Yeah, it's Christmas, everybody. It should be about brightness. So I'll have a word with them in the break. Well, actually, no, I won't in the break. We're not going to get changed in the break, are we? It is what it is. Someone else has said, Michelle, your hideous Christmas tree is trending online. I don't know what you mean. I suspect you've not seen mine. If you mean the studio one, you're completely wrong. It's wonderful. It's nice and Christmassy in the studio. I love it. Not long to go. Right, you know, the drill, don't you, on Dewbs & Co. It's not just about us three in the studio tonight. It's about you at home as well. What's on your mind tonight? You can get in touch with me. All those stories I'll be covering tonight. I want to talk about the NHS, also strikes, trade deals and Christmas. Are you offended by the notion of a Christmas party? If you are, quite frankly, I say don't go. But some civil servants have been briefing to change the name of said festivities and to do things like not drink alcohol, just in case there might be someone there that doesn't. Like, no chance, that's what I'd say. Not at my Christmas party anyway. Right, get in touch, gbviews at gbnews.uk is the email address, or you can tweet me at gbnews. Now, one of the themes of coming weeks, hopefully not months, will be, of course, the strikes. RMT union has today rejected another pay offer. So those strikes will be going ahead. And as we speak, if it's going according to the timings, our Health Secretary will be meeting with the nurses union all about the goings on there. But apparently he doesn't want to get into the pay conversation. So I'm pondering tonight, Peter, I'll start with you. There's been a lot of criticism levelled at this government saying that they are not involved enough with the unions in terms of these negotiations. Do you think they should be more involved or not?
Yes, I think they should be, because it's essentially reached a crisis point. And, you know, if Steve Barclay, the Health Secretary, is in negotiations tonight, then why has he left it to the last minute? And if, as your intro said, he's refusing to talk about pay, then why is he ducking one of the core issues? And I don't want to make everything party political because it's boring, but the perception might be that he knows something must be done, so turning up at talks at the 11th hour gives the impression of activity without necessarily engaging on substance. Yeah,
but when it comes to negotiations, though, most of the things do happen at the 11th hour. That is literally when a lot of deals are done. They're not done weeks and months in advance. It's right up until the bone in some cases, isn't it?
It's certainly right up to the bone, and I think that reflects both sides, really, as well as this kind of relatively slow wheels mandated by law of trade union ballots and so on. But there's no reason why Steve Barclay couldn't have got involved in negotiations before today.
Do you think he should have done, Henry?
Well, the government has actually already been getting involved in some of the negotiations. For example, with the railway strike, it's actually a very complicated situation because the unions are negotiating with the TOCs, the train companies, but then the government is intervening and setting conditions. But ultimately, yes, the government, as the ultimate employer of public servants and as the institution that distributes taxpayers' money, which is what pays them, the government does have final say over all of these decisions. And so ultimately, the government will have to be involved. So it's a bit surprising that they've been sort of hiding behind some of the sort of intermediate employers for so long, given that they are the ones who ultimately have to make the decisions.
But don't you think it's probably a case of actually they're sitting there and thinking if anyone can just sit there at a whim and summon, for example, Rishi Sunak, in some cases that's what they've been requesting, to come and meet and talk with them, then where do you go from there? If that is literally your first response, you want to meet the Prime Minister, oh yeah, OK, there you go, there's the Prime Minister. How do you move on?
I don't think anyone's saying that you need to send Rishi Sunak, but health ministers, not even the Secretary of State for Health ministers, negotiating with public sector unions and the NHS is probably just a reasonable part of their remit. Certainly, they should maybe have, if we'd had these, not necessarily these negotiations, but if we'd had a more regular dialogue sooner, maybe ministers would have seen this coming. And even if they weren't going to fold on the pay demands, they might have been able to have more time to get plans in place than they've actually had. So actually, it's simply a fact that, not really in the private sector anymore since Margaret Thatcher and all the trade changes she made to trade unions, but in the public sector, where you do still have these big unions capable of coordinated action, talking to the unions is part of ministers' job.
Yeah, I want to come to you in a minute, Peter, on Labour's position. I want you to help me understand it. But you've just brought up, Henry, so I'll just pause with you a second, about coordinated action across unions. Do you think that should be allowed? Because what's happening now is a national strike, perhaps not technically named as such, but it is in many ways, isn't it? Do you think that's right?
So the reason that public sector unions can do this is because in the 1980s we brought in all sorts of legislation which restricted the ability of trade unions to do things like sympathy strikes and industry-wide action. But because public sector workers are all ultimately employed by the government, that means that say teachers or nurses or anyone, their employer is the government, and therefore all nurses can go on strike and all teachers can go on strike. Now, sympathy strikes, which is where you go on strike just to support someone else's claim, are still illegal, but there's not really all that much you can do if you've got two public sector unions, both of which have pay disputes with the government. It's hard to see how you could legally restrict them from scheduling those strikes at the same time, realistically. I mean, you could in theory, but that's going to get quite unmanageable. I think realistically, if the government wanted to do structural changes to make this much more difficult, they should have followed through with the spirit of the reforms, because if nurses were actually employed by NHS trusts rather than, the Ministry of Health, if teachers were employed by multi-academy trusts rather than by the government, then you couldn't have sector-wide strikes and you'd have far fewer of these problems. But those restructuring hasn't happened, and that's why we are where we are.
And Peter, so help me understand, because I've tried to understand and I hear a lot of words, but I still don't fathom whether or not Labour is advocating pay rises and to what extent they would be advocating those pay rises. Do you?
Well, in the NHS, Labour repeatedly said that staff don't deserve to have their pay cut in real terms, but they've also advised the Royal College of Nursing, which is in effect the nurses' trade union, that their 19% claim was far too high and they weren't going to get it. And I think Wes Streeting has actually been criticised a little bit on the left, but for giving some what he perceives as home truths to parts of the NHS. For example, if you invest more in staffing, then that will come with pay increase, but at a limited rate. And whoever wins the next general election is going to face difficult choices. So I think Labour have, of course, tried to highlight what the government are doing wrong in terms of competence and picking an ideological battle while keeping some of their powder dry, which I think is reasonable for any opposition. I'd say briefly, the other point is I don't think we're in a general strike at all, because if you think about who's going on strike, it's either the public sector or former parts of the public sector, like people in the postal service used to be in the state, and obviously train operating companies, before privatisation used to be part of the state. But it's either the public sector or public services. But, for example, Unite workers in a supermarket are not going on strikes. So I really don't think it's fair to call it a general strike as well.
And help me understand, because I've just listened to you and I still don't understand, why aren't Labour just coming out and saying, I don't know, if we were in charge today, we would issue a 10% pay rise. You're saying they're keeping their powder dry and you understand why. I don't understand why. What am I missing?
Because any opposition, I think, is wary of making spending commitments and also wary of inflaming the dispute further. And I think it's reasonable for, say, shadow cabinet ministers that aspire to be in government in a couple of years' time to give a direction of travel on values and policy, but say we can't give answers on pounds and pence of what salary levels would be like in 2 years' time.
But I'm not asking them 2 years' time. What I would like to hear from Labour is that I don't care about 2 years' time. The people watching this that are going on strike that want their pay increase, they want it now. So they will be looking to Labour and going, if you were in power today, if you were looking at your numbers today, what number would you give me today? Why can't they do that?
Well, have you invited the Labour front bench on your show?
We don't have politicians. We have like you instead. This is not...
I almost fell off my chair when you called me interesting, but...
I was about to say something that I thought was hilarious then, but I didn't. I stopped myself. But no, we don't. That's not the kind of show that we do. We don't get politicians. We have conversations instead with the likes of you guys. But I'm asking you, because you are former editor of Labour List, you are an advocate of the Labour Party, and I don't understand it. I listen to them, and I listen to them on the weekend politics shows, and I listen and I just think, but you're not coming out with any substance. You're saying things like, yes, I would enter into talks, but so what? What would you achieve? What would you drive for? What would you push for? What would your outcome be?
Well, I think Labour have provided their substance, but they haven't given what you want, which is a number.
Yeah.
So they've said, on one hand, that people working public services shouldn't have their pay cut in an economic crisis in real terms, but they've also said to nurses that 19% is too high and health ministers should get around the negotiating table. So you're absolutely right. They've tried to navigate both the demands on public services and the political pressures.
They're sat on the fence. And I think if you want to be an effective opposition, if you want to show yourself to be the next force for good in this country, you shouldn't be on the fence. You should have some kahunas about you. You should back yourself and you should come up with something.
But briefly, you refer to it as kahunas, but if you're...
I was being polite. I would have said something else, actually, but I wasn't on telly, but yeah.
But for any institution, whether it's a Labour government or a Tory government, if you're negotiating, then isn't there a negotiating sense in not putting a lot of numbers in the public domain?
But they're not negotiating. Am I missing something? You're a smart political guy, Henry. Maybe I'm just being a bit thick. But to me, I'm sitting there and I shout at the screen when I listen to people, Labour politicians, Keir Starmer. They make great platitudes, great criticism. But what is your solution? What would you do? If I'm a nurse and I'm sitting here now thinking, my mum and sister are nurses, if I was them too, and I'm sitting here now going, right, at the next election, would I have got a better deal from Labour or the Tories? Who shall I vote for in the next election? I would like to know, well, what would you be offering? What would you be doing? What would you be driving for?
I'm sure you would. I think the reason that you won't get that is because it's much easier for Labour, and this is, again, I think the Tories would be doing this if the Tories were in opposition, in fairness. It's much easier to make maximum political capital out of it if you don't pin yourself down. But also, bluntly, if there was a Labour government, they'd be facing the same broad economic situation. They'd be having to make the same tough choices. And that's not a popular position to be in. If you're the opposition, you don't want to be raining on your parade and telling everyone that actually it's not just the Tories. We'd all have to find more money from somewhere and the money just isn't there. So it's easier to attack the government. It is very unsatisfying to see them constantly attacking the government without saying what they would do to end the strikes. But I think the truth is that's because if we had a Labour government, based on what we've heard from Wes Streeting, the Labour government would still be facing down the unions and we would probably still have an awful lot of strikes.
Yeah, I just find it very, very sad. I was thinking about that awful situation, just mentioned it a second ago, about the children in the lakes, and I know it had a really tragic ending, of course. But I was watching all the emergency services, all the first responders and all the rest of it, and I was just looking at thinking, God, can you imagine what would have happened if that was on a strike day? You've got that situation alongside all of the other things. It just doesn't bear thinking about, and I really hope that things can be done to stop some of these strikes. In Scotland, by the way, they've accepted a 7.5% pay rise. That's on average. Some of the lowest earners get up to 11%. So the strikes there have been paused, which I think is good news. Let's hope we can achieve something similar here. Let me know your thoughts. What do you think is a fair pay rise, by the way? Put a figure on it. Put yourself out there. Give me a number. I'm fascinated to hear what you think. I'm going to take a quick break. When I come back, I want to continue my NHS conversation in some way because bed blocking, I think that is one of the key issues facing the NHS at the moment. It's causing lots of backlogs and all the rest of it. What's the solution to it, though? I think I've got an idea, but I'd like to hear yours. GBNews at gbviews. I just gave you the wrong one. gbviews at gbnews.uk is the email. Tell me and I'll see you in a couple of minutes.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television, and online, across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prisons?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned.
I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, We're
on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. for Gloria Meets. In exclusive interviews, I'll be finding out who our politicians really are and what they really think.
It's something that you would never want anyone to suffer.
I didn't know what channels there were. I didn't think I'd be believed.
I must have weighed about 7 stone and I'm 5'8".
My instincts was to sort of cover this up. Clearly that was a mistake.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, welcome back to Dewbs & Co with me, Michelle Dewberry, right through, keeping you company till 7 o'clock tonight. And in the studio alongside me, I've got my panel, Henry Hill, who's the Deputy Editor of Conservative Home, and Peter Edwards, the former editor of Labour List. We've just got a nice email in, everybody. Margaret says, Michelle, I can think of nothing better to do right now than sit with a glass of wine, listening to Peter, Henry and yourself debate the issues of the day. That's nice, isn't it?
Very nice.
Is Margaret anyone's mum?
No.
No, not mine. Well, we appreciate the compliment, Margaret. Thank you. I was asking you, by the way, just before the break, strikes. I want numbers. I want cold, hard numbers. If you were running the country, what kind of pay rise do you think is fair and reasonable for people going on strike? Don't dilly-dally. Don't sit on the fence. Don't go around the houses. Just give me a number. Matt says 7% is what he thinks is fair. Derek says no more than a 7.5%. David says no more than 7%. What about the majority of the workers? What about everyone, in fact? We all have to suffer with inflation. So there you go, 7.5% is what I'm getting through on my inbox at the moment. Do you think that's fair and reasonable? Or do you think it should be a little bit higher? You get in touch, tell me your thoughts. You can also tweet me if that's your thing at GBNews. But let's stick with the theme of the NHS, shall we? We all know pretty much it's in a bit of a mess at the moment, don't we? And by the way, I'm not knocking a frontline staff. I know that doctors and workers and all the rest of it work very hard. I'm talking about the concept of the organisation. Over 7 million people, for example, on waiting lists right now. It's just not great, is it? Let's be honest. Bed blockers, it's a horrible term, but I do think there are so many people in hospital that, quite frankly, do not need to be there. About 13,000 people hit that bill, tick that box, should I say, recently. That's just one number. And I think to myself, look, if you didn't have those 13,000 people taking up the beds who are not in medical need, they don't need to be in hospital, they could be out and about, but there's just not the services or the capacity or whatever it is to discharge them. If you did that, I think that would be a first step in trying to resolve some of these problems. So I've put my thinking caps on, gents. I've come up with a very simple idea. I partially floated it the other day. If Steve Barclay's listening, he can have it for free. And if they implement it, I will say that they've stolen it off me. Remember those Nightingale hospitals that we used to have that were knocked up quicker than a quick thing in Quickland during COVID? Set those back up again and draft in the army, and I know people won't be happy with this, but draft in the army temporarily to get these people out of hospital, comfortable, free up those beds, and away you go. It'll give you some breathing space to sort out the issues going forward. Yes, you need reform, but I think that's a great stopgap solution. If I say so myself, I want to pat myself on my own back, but I can't. I'll knock my microphone off. What do you think?
I actually think it's a really interesting idea. I don't know about using the army. I know the military chiefs are really wary about the army getting called in for more and more stuff. But the Nightingales thing is really interesting because what the Nightingales were, they were called hospitals. They weren't really fully equipped hospitals. I think they were referred to dismissively by someone as ventilation centres. But they basically provided one form of care. Now, bed blockers, which is an ugly term, but it's...
I know, it's not nice. I do apologise if you're watching this. You might be in a hospital bed watching it now, shouting, telling me who do I think I am, but...
But it is the term. These are people who don't need the sort of care that a hospital is on hand to provide, but they need to be basically looked after. So the idea of a Nightingale would actually be, I think, relatively well suited to being a kind of outpatient warehouse, if you like. Basically, you get people...
Even worse than my term.
No, but I mean, it's structurally, structurally, that's what it would be. It would be, you've got people out of hospital where they don't need to be in close proximity to, advanced diagnostics and acute care, but they don't have anywhere in the community. So you basically have these big centres which are just there for looking after outpatients and providing a general... I think that could actually really work.
Yeah, so do I. Peter, what do you stand?
Well, I think Henry set out the pros and cons very well because, on the one hand, you don't want to see the army involved because we don't want industrial disputes in the first place, and NHS doctors and nurses and paramedics would all rather be doing their job. But I think that the great virtue and national pride of the Nightingale Clinic was that in a social and a health and an economic crisis, the country came together to put these hospitals up at incredibly short notice, almost quicker than anywhere in the world other than China when it's done in about a week. But the effort for Nightingales was fantastic. But Henry used the word warehouse, which I know he didn't mean in a derogatory way, because they were vast semi-industrial open spaces, or they were conference centres. So it can't be a hospital, and it definitely can't be a care home either, because that's a totally different environment for very vulnerable people, often near the end of their life. But they are these vast spaces. I think when they're empty, they're a bit like a hangar, where there may be a case you could deploy not just the site, but also the ingenuity and the staffing and the equipment to try and get some people out of main hospitals for their into social care. And I think what we take away, we can talk about logistics, but what we take away from it a couple of years ago is a can-do spirit.
So, I mean, with all due respect to us three, we're not, we're not necessarily up there in Mensa's highest ranking. So why do you think that the government haven't come up with this and started implementing it themselves?
Well, I mean, as I said, I think that they've prepared quite badly. They've prepared quite badly for these strikes. There is also the staffing issue, because I know we'd said the army, but realistically, you'd have to have a basic level of medical expertise on hand in order to run these as part of the NHS, right?
But I assume that soldiers do have. medical.
Well, they're not. No, there are medics in the military, but they're not all trained medical professionals. I think there is sometimes a tendency, including for people like me, to treat soldiers as if they're some kind of one-stop solution for any manpower need that the state happens to have. That is a limitation, and I think that ultimately bed blocking is not just a crisis point for now. It's a fairly chronic problem in the NHS. So I think that actually, if you did embark on this, you would end up not using hangars, but I think you'd end up with something that was purpose-built, and then that would become a permanent part of the NHS framework. Now, that has cost implications. I think the maths might probably work, but it has cost implications. But it's a big capital project, and so that's why I think the government's not reached for it immediately.
Yeah, and people are writing in saying about convalescent hospitals or centres or homes, cottage hospitals, some people are calling them as well. If they were there and it was a thing, what happened to them?
Well, cottage hospitals are very different. You know, I've been treated in many times. They're like smaller hospitals, a bit more in suburbia without an A&E, but they've still got, I mean, they do a great service, but they've still got the overheads and the costs that makes hospital care relatively expensive. I think to follow your train of thought, Nightingale hospitals were for a crisis, and we're told COVID was a once-in-a-thousand-year crisis, but part of the root of the problem is what's happening in social care. And obviously, with a social care sector where the staff are perhaps paid a bit more and upskilled a bit more, they might be able to provide more support. And I think to try and be fair, although I think there's a social care crisis now, it's obviously been running across several governments for a couple of decades, getting gradually worse.
Tracy's got a good idea. She says, it's Brian that says this. I was giving credit to the wrong person there. He says, what about using holiday camps throughout the winter? They're sitting and empty. Got all these facilities, Butlins, Pontings, others are available.
Well, I mean, presumably if you set these up, then a logistical team could look at the specifics. I think maybe there'd be a problem that holiday camps are almost, by definition, quite a long way away from hospitals and other centres where we have a lot of these patients, right? You know, if you're trying to clear out the big urban hospitals where you've got the biggest backlogs, you're potentially moving people a very long way. But again, the fine details of it is a separate question. But I think in terms of building up that extra support, given that we do clearly have a chronic problem of people who are staying in hospital longer than they need the services of a full hospital, that's something that the government should be looking at.
Yeah, I mean, I get so many people are just writing in. The convalescent homes, we just need to go back to that. It's all very simple. David says, why don't we... This is not a bad question, actually, David. You're saying all of these people that are in hospitals, why don't we use these hotels that the government is commandeering at the moment for people crossing the Channel? Why don't we use those hotels for this kind of function instead? I have to say, I don't disagree with that. I am interested, though. I've just seen someone email in, and I'm going to find that email. Oh, here we go. Why should the armed forces have to do all of this stuff, including covering for striking emergency workers? You're quite harsh, though, Ian, because you go on, you say you think there's a real simple solution to this. If you expect the army to cover you when you're on strike, you should be then conscripted into the army to do some form of national service in return. Cool, blimey, I'm not sure that idea will float very well. No way should the government intervene in negotiations, Michelle, where private companies are concerned. This is a capitalist country, not a socialist country. Please, can the politicians stay out of it? Well, there you go. That's your thoughts on some of the strike ones as well. Let me know your situation, your thoughts in terms of the backlog that we've just been talking about in the NHS hospitals. Particularly as well, I'm interested, are you in the army? Because I'm saying that the army could be brought in to staff these centres. Henry makes a good point, which is actually we're in danger of seeing the army as some kind of, I don't know, one-size-fits-all recruitment thing. We just shove them in everywhere. Are you in the army? Do you listen to this and shout at your screen and say, absolutely no chance? Get in touch. Let me know. gbviews@gbnews.uk is my email address. Going to take a quick break. When I come back, post-Brexit Britain, what should it look like when it comes to trade deals? There's been a bit of criticism at the moment. James Cleverly, he's saying he's going to embark on new trade deals with like middle-level countries. Some people are saying it's a race to the bottom and that the UK looks like it doesn't care about human rights. Is that true? Or is it just basically trading with people? Common sense. You tell me your thoughts and I'll see you in a couple of minutes.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dewbs & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Mark Stein. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
We are GB News, the People's Channel. Why not take us home with you by visiting the GB News shop at gbnews.store. You'll find all the official merchandise, a really good present actually for yourself, your friends or your family.
We ship across the UK mainland at no extra cost. GB News, the People's Channel.
Here on GB News Live, we'll be keeping you in the picture, finding out what's happening across the country and finding out why it matters to you. We'll have the facts fast with our team of reporters and specialist correspondents. Wherever it's happening, we'll be there from 12 noon on TV, radio and online. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. We're going to be here for you, our GB News family, to keep you up to date, but also make you smile.
The guy went from puberty to adultery.
And I can't wait to bring a few of my own opinions.
I have no time for cultural totalitarianism.
We'll engage in passionate, but always polite debate, with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
Hello there, welcome back to Dewbs & Co with me, Michelle Dewberry, keeping you company till 7 o'clock tonight. Alongside me, we've got Henry Hill, who's the Deputy Editor of Conservative Home, and Peter Edwards, former editor of Labour List. I've just been talking about should we potentially have the Nightingale hospitals back open again to help with, crudely what people call bed blockers. Want your thoughts on that? Robin says, Michelle, are you three absolutely thick? Where do you think you're going to get the staff to man these Nightingales? Robin, were you not paying attention, my friend? I proposed a solution at the start, which was, I was saying, get the armed forces, get the army in, get those guys to help staff. I thought it was a good idea. You are, of course, free to disagree. Alan says, Michelle, the Nightingale hospitals were exhibition centres. What are you proposing? That would just go shut down the £11 billion exhibition and events industry? That's Alan there, completely disagreeing with me. Not a problem. Keep your thoughts coming in. GB Views at gbnews.uk is how you reach me tonight. Right, post-Brexit Britain. What should it look like? Who should we trade with? Should there be limits? Should there be a cut-off or a threshold as to, yes, you country A, you make the grade, country B, no, we don't like the look of you. You're up to the things that are no good. Country C, you're not on diplomacy, so no marks for you. Should it work like that? Or should we basically just say, you know what, if you've got things to trade, you want to do business, we're open to you. There's been lots of criticism. The reason I'm bringing this up tonight, because apparently the UK is set to downgrade the commitments to human rights for closer diplomatic ties. This is all about our Foreign Secretary. He's saying we're going to move forward, we're going to create relations, trade, all the rest of it with countries like Africa, Latin America and Asia. Henry, some people are saying it's a bit of a race to the bottom and that we should have higher standards than some of this. What do you think?
Well, you do have to be very careful. It's a fine balancing act because on the one hand, human rights are important, Western values are good, and it's good that we try and export those around the world. On the other hand, we're not in a position to dictate to other countries how they organise.
Export our Western values around the world?
As in, if you believe that liberal democracy, freedom of speech, equality for women are important, then you should try to encourage other countries to adopt those norms. I don't think that's a particularly controversial statement, but we're not in a position, even if we wanted to do that by force. We tried that in the noughties under George W. Bush. Didn't really pan out all that well. So you have to engage. And it's also just in our country's interest, especially if we're going to be boycotting Russia, for example. We can't then afford to get on our high horse and boycott the rest of the oil-producing countries, most of which, have governments that we might not like the records of. So what we actually need to do is we need to recognise that if we don't trade with these countries, they're only going to go and trade with countries like China, which care even less about human rights, altogether. And so it has to be a fine balancing act. We need to engage, but we need to make sure that that engagement is in accordance with our values. And that means, for example, making sure that Western companies that are operating in these countries are not exploiting workers, are not breaching human rights themselves, and that we are upholding our standards even as we forge these economic relationships.
Peter?
Well, I think the two are in tension, aren't they? Human rights and trade. And I think the kind of first part of having an adult conversation in politics is admitting that, as your kind of intro alluded to. And this has been a debate, you know, probably for the last 100 years. You know, remember Robin Cook, when he came in as Foreign Secretary, said he wanted Britain to have an ethical foreign policy. I wrote down 3 examples just from recent times for us to think about. Russia, well, of course, quite rightly, none of us want to do trade deals with Putin because of their evil invasion of Ukraine. But, of course, the whole of Europe has continued to be reliant on Russia for energy to a certain extent since the incursion into Crimea, which was 8 years ago. Then there's Iran, where a protester was executed this week, which is absolutely revolting. So, of course, Britain's rightly not wanting to do trade deals with Iran. But then there's also America, and I don't draw an equivalence at all because America's a democracy with a free media and human rights. But America does still have the death penalty, which we in Britain across the spectrum, I think, generally find disgusting. And, of course, we are rushing to do trade deals with America all the time. And I suspect in those countries that do have a free media, they're probably having the same debate about us because, you know, the word that sort of hangs over this debate is Iraq, isn't it? In the events of 2003, where Britain was hugely criticised on the world stage. So I think it's very tough to land in the right place this argument. But I'm a bit sceptical about what James Cleverly says, because I think any new British government wants to have a reset on foreign policy, but then they all want to grow the economy as well.
Yeah, I don't know, there's part of me that just feels a little bit... there was a saying I was about to say that I can't say on telly, but it makes me cringe a little bit. That's better. It makes me cringe a little bit because I sometimes feel that many people expect the UK, or they want the UK to be this kind of holier-than-thou, sitting across at the top, looking down, lecturing people, dictating that you must do this and you must do that and you must do this. And I just feel a little bit uncomfortable, I suspect, because I think it's steeped in hypocrisy. Like, we've already just listed examples of countries that we do trade with already that are questionable, to put it mildly, and many people don't seem to care. They want to do trade. So then I think, why now is this conversation coming up tonight? And it makes me feel a little bit like what people are trying to do is just almost pull down post-Brexit Britain. They're looking to undermine attempts to try and forge new relationships, partnerships. Am I being paranoid?
I couldn't tell you. It would depend on the motivations of the people involved. I think it's an important debate, though, and as you say, it's not just tonight. This debate has been going on for a long time, and I don't think you can ever really get away from it with foreign policy. There is always a tension between, moral, ethical values, interests, and then commercial ties. So this debate isn't going to go anywhere, and quite rightly so. I think it is a bit specious to compare, countries like Saudi Arabia and Iran to countries, like the United States. But I think the most important thing, the charge of hypocrisy is quite a tedious one, because you can never really make the enemy the perfect of the good, right? Maybe we will never have a spotless moral record. Maybe many of the countries with which we have alliances won't have a spotless moral record. But I don't really think that that's an adequate excuse to stop us trying to encourage countries like Iran to stop oppressing women and executing protesters. I think you can probably do both of those things and keep a healthy balance.
We've not achieved it very well. No one seems to have achieved it very much, because a lot of these countries have been operating this way for a very, very long time, whilst wanting and needing the revenue from trade, and they've not changed their ways previously.
Well, I'm not saying necessarily that we'll be successful. I don't think you can mandate that any government policy be successful, but I think you can advocate for it and try, whilst striking the right balance with this country's strategic and economic interests. I don't think there's an excuse for saying, as some people do on the hypocrisy front, that just because Britain or America have done something wrong, we can't use what clout we have to try and advocate for improvements in other countries.
Well, there you go. Let me know your thoughts on that. You guys are still getting in touch with me about that first topic tonight, where I was asking you on the strikes how much. I've asked you to give me numbers tonight, everyone. What pay rise do you think is appropriate for the people going on strike at the moment. 7-ish was about the number that was coming through. I've got some feedback here as well. You can't give people on benefits a 10.1% or whatever it was and not then do the same to those people in work. So there's quite a few of you saying that 10% should be the answer. Are you in the private sector? Have you got a pay rise at all? And let me ponder you this, by the way. Do you think it's realistic for people to expect not to have a decline in living standards when you've got things like the after effects of the ridiculous lockdown policies, when you've got the awful situation in Ukraine, you've got all of these different things that are driving inflation? Do you think it's realistic to even have the ambition, aspiration that living standards shouldn't be impacted at all? Give me your thoughts, GBViews at gbnews.uk. When is a Christmas party not a Christmas party? Well, it depends if you work in the civil service, because some people there have been told if you're having a Christmas party, be sensitive, call them things like festive gatherings. If people don't want to drink alcohol there, be sensitive to it. Change your ways, perhaps. Why? Well, diversion and inclusion. Diversity and inclusion. I mean, come off it. Am I being a bit harsh? Tell me and I'll see you in a couple of minutes.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
And the national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
We are GB News, right across the nation. You can get us on television, on radio, on digital. We're absolutely everywhere.
Amazing! You see, amazing!
You remind me of me in the European Parliament. But here's the most important bit. We are not part of the mainstream establishment. We think and speak just like you do. We are the People's Channel.
Magnificent. That's really, really thoughtful.
Come and join us on GB News, the People's News Channel.
My name's Tom Harwood, and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Join me, Nana Akue, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride.
Oh, she's on it today!
Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank, and of course, fun. Every Saturday and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel.
Hello there, welcome back to Dewbs & Co with me, Michelle Dewbs. Keeping you company till 7 o'clock tonight, and alongside me, Henry Hill, who's the Deputy Editor of Conservative Home, and Peter Edwards, the former editor of Labour List. Lots of conversation still about how you would staff the Nightingale hospitals if we had them. Jan says, what about rehiring? All of those, I think it was about 40,000 or something, wasn't it? Those people that lost their jobs because they wouldn't have the mandated vaccine, COVID vaccine. I think you're spot on there. I'd have those people reinstated if they haven't already been. A heartbeat, what would you be waiting for? Makes no sense to me. Carol says, great idea. How about we could staff them with all the retired doctors, nurses and other professionals who stepped up and volunteered during COVID. After all, she says, we're in a crisis right now. Yes, unfortunately, I do tend to agree with you there. Right, Christmas parties. Does that phrase offend you? If I invited you to one, would you not want to go because, I don't know, you're not into Christmas or whatever? Apparently, some civil servants have been told to refer to their Christmas parties as things like end-of-year celebrations, festive celebrations. One organisation was being told apparently that they had to find a restaurant that didn't serve alcohol in order not to offend someone who is sober. This is all apparently in a big drive to kind of push the diversity and inclusion agenda. I have to say, I think it's bonkers. If you're offended by Christmas or anything like that, don't go to a Christmas party. This is not difficult. Henry, where do you stand on it?
When I read this story, my heart went out to whoever the poor civil servant was who doesn't drink on that team, because in my experience, they will almost certainly not have asked for this. I was teetotal for about 7 years, and I can think of nothing that would actually be more likely to make things awkward between me and my colleagues than if the Christmas party was ruined on my account. And I think most people, if they don't drink or they don't celebrate Christmas, they're still perfectly happy to go to something where people are drinking or what that's called a Christmas party. And then of the people who aren't, most of those would just not go. It's a tiny minority of people who would actually complain, and I don't think that we should be pandering to them. In fairness, this wasn't an edict from the top of the civil service. What it looks like, and this is so often what happens, it's individual HR departments at different sections and different teams giving out different advice, confusing advice, and I think it's important that we push back on it.
Yeah, I think we should push back. I think it's pathetic. I think it's a waste of time. I think these civil servant bosses, whoever they are, however many of them are, they should have better things to do, quite frankly, with their time than this. Peter, where are you on it?
Well, I don't think it's an example of inclusion. I think it's something that's either Orwellian or Cromwellian to ban things, and banning Christmas is not the answer. But I'd make a broader point as well, which is I'm a Christian and I live in East London, one of the most diverse parts of the country, and I've never met anyone of any faith who's offended by Christmas, just like I'm not offended by Muslim or Hindu colleagues bringing in sweets to work for festivals like Eid Mubarak or Diwali. It's a merit and a positive part of whatever you want to call it, diversity, multi-faith, or just being a nation of many, that we enjoy each other's celebrations. And I just don't accept the idea that there's one person in the civil service who's saying we've got to pander to a particular group. No faith group is offended by another faith group having a celebration.
Do you know what I put this down to? All of these kind of diversity and inclusion chiefs that are earning a decent whack got to justify their existence. They've got to get there at the end of the year and they say, look, boss, look at what I achieved. I did all of this to make this organisation so much more inclusive. The Christmas party is now called an end-of-year gathering. So now she can come because she's not comfortable being around alcohol. But look what I did. I transformed it and I moved it over to this Serba restaurant over there, so tick points to me. I think it's absolutely absurd. And you might have heard this story as well. This was a pantomime, Aladdin, by the way, that was cancelled because of cultural insensitivity. This is in Dorset, basically. And they're saying that they've had complaints. They've just decided to cancel it. They gave consideration to sanitising the script, their words, not mine, but just decided it probably wasn't worth the hassle and canned it all. Now, I have to say, if you are somebody who is offended by Aladdin or anything else, quite frankly, related to Christmas or pantomime or all the rest of it, this is what I do not understand. Nobody forces you to leave your house and go to watch this Aladdin pantomime or indeed to go to these Christmas parties. So if you are offended by Aladdin or Christmas parties or alcohol or whatever it is, stay at home. Go do something else with your time. Where is this obsession come from, this desperate attempt not to offend people? Why do people think that they exist in a society where they should be sheltered from being offended? It absolutely blows my brain. I don't know who's coming up with this. I don't know why people are condoning it. It's absolutely ridiculous. If you're invited to a Christmas party, go if you want to. And if you don't want to go do something else with your time. That's my thoughts on it all. Anyway, we're nice and festive in this studio, aren't we? Someone's asking, where are your lights on the Christmas tree? I can see them. I think they've just not yet been plugged in. I'll have a word, so I will. Lots of you still on this conversation at the start about the pay rises. Some people are saying, why should anyone get a pay rise right now at all? Well, because people are struggling. They can't afford to pay their bills, can they? Colin says, there's an independent peer review board operational for things like this. Why are they just being completely disregarded?
I can answer that briefly because the recommendations were made before inflation reaches levels, so there's a time lag.
Look how happy he is that he knows the answer. Look at him. I like that. That's the level.
In the last minute of the show, I get one right.
Yeah, that's the level of engagement and enthusiasm I like from the panel. Lots of you as well getting in touch saying that we should bring back the convalescent hospitals as a permanent feature of NHS care. I have to say, on that trade deal, we should trade, Stuart says we should trade with anyone that will benefit our country and our people, full stop. Philip says, well, Michelle, unless we actually start manufacturing stuff again, we won't have much to trade with at all. Dave, trade is trade. There are zero morals involved. Goodness me. Peter, that is all we've got time for. Henry, you too. Thank you for your company. Thank you at home for yours. You can catch up, by the way, on our podcast, online, on the radio, wherever. It's been nice to share the hour with you. Up next, Nigel Farage. Nigel, good evening.
Well, Michelle,
welcome back. What have you got for us?
Thank you very much. Thank you, Michelle. Well, I'll tell you what I got for you. It's cold, it's snowing, and today, electricity prices, wholesale prices, hit a new all-time high. Ultimately, a bill that you're going to be picking up, and we could be firing back up 2 coal-fired power stations. Is it time for a big energy rethink? Well, I tell you what, the weather perhaps matters more than anything. Let's see what's in prospect for us over the next couple of days.
Good evening, I'm Alex Deakin, and this is your latest weather update from the Met Office. The cold weather will continue through this week. Ice and frost will be prevalent, and the potential for a bit more snow in some areas. The UK is kind of surrounded by low pressure systems, but not really having a direct hit on the UK. We're just staying in the cold conditions with snow showers around the edges, but some heavy snow falling at the moment across Shetland, and the snow showers will work into the mainland of northern Scotland overnight. Across the southeast, where we had the snow last night, could be really quite icy here. Elsewhere, most places dry, some misty, murky conditions persisting over central areas, but many places clear, and that will lead it to turn cold, -5, -6, even in some towns and cities, negative double figures across Scotland, perhaps as low as -20 in some locations. More snow showers coming in here as well, so ice and snow is a risk in the morning over northern Scotland. Still potentially icy across the southeast first thing, and then a few showers just drift into southeast Scotland, northeast England later on. They could have some snow mixed in. Otherwise, a largely dry day, reasonably bright, but temperatures again struggling to get much above freezing. It will feel cold, particularly as the winds pick up in the southwest. Now, here we are looking at some wet weather just pushing in during the course of Tuesday evening. This will be a mixture of rain, sleet and snow.